It's Thursday, September 18th, and a little bit of a surprise here as Tropical Storm Gabrielle just formed out here in the Atlantic Ocean. Now, currently, it doesn't really look that impressive other than the pretty clear center of low pressure, a couple of convection towers along the center, and then in the northeastern sector of the storm, we're seeing a lot of convection. It really doesn't look super great, but there is actually a pretty big wind field with this, with maximum sustained winds of already 50 miles per hour. And here's a better look on this. We can see a pretty decently sized wind field, and this is actually expected to stay a tropical storm all the way up until around the Saturday, Sunday, so really this weekend. And then the track becomes a bit more uncertain, other than we're pretty confident that it's going to make that curve back out towards the Atlantic, not heading towards the United States at all, but it could potentially impact Bermuda as a hurricane. So if you know anybody in Bermuda, or if you're in Bermuda, definitely going to want to stay very weather aware of this storm. And here's the European model run of this. It's going to be this little system right here, highlighted by that low pressure. And as we can see, it's going to pretty much cover that exact track we just looked at. And then it's going to strengthen into a hurricane as it gets closer to Bermuda, and then it will either turn eastward just in time, or it could potentially go through the island. So definitely going to want to stay weather aware of this before it gets deflected back out to the Atlantic by one of those cold fronts pushing off of the US. So definitely going to want to look out for that. And we do have a couple more areas of interest out here in the Atlantic, as it is just peak hurricane season. That's something that we normally see, but currently the Euro and not really any of our other models are picking up on a super big chance of those forming either. And here's a better look on the tropical outlook of what I was just talking about. Of course, we have Tropical Storm Gabrielle, then two other areas of interest, both only having a 10 or 20% chance of formation. So that chance of formation as of right now is very low, and a lot of our models agree with that. But right now we do technically have triple trouble out here in the tropics. So just a reminder that it is technically peak hurricane season, and we're going to likely see something like this for at least the rest of the month. And on top of all that, we actually do have a severe weather risk today. It's actually kind of a boomerang or banana shape, stretching all the way from Oklahoma up into Iowa, kind of that southern and central plains risk. And this would mostly be for that threat of some damaging 60-mile-an-hour wind gust in this region. And then also there's going to be a smaller threat of hail, although that's going to be confined to mostly the southern plains portion of our risk, potentially seeing some 1 to 1.5 inch in diameter hail today. Nothing really crazy on that front. And then for tornado risk, there's not really anything outlined, but because of just the nature of our system, we have a big spinning low with a big front that's pretty favorably sheared. I think we could actually see a decent area of some non-zero tornado probabilities today as well. And here's exactly what I'm talking about. This is a better look of what it might look out here in the central and southern plains today. We have that big low pressure center, and then of course that trough pushing through, and then that big cold front swooping down with a couple of embedded low pressure systems within it. And we actually see that because of this, our shear isn't going to be that bad. I think we could see a non-zero tornado risk for pretty much anywhere along this cold front and up near this low pressure center. Even as we go into the afternoon hours, I think that risk will only elevate, but it looks like it's going to be a pretty messy storm mode, which would hinder that a lot and would just make it that conditional threat for some 60-mile damaging winds, and then also some small hail. Looks like that risk is mostly going to be for some 60-mile-an-hour damaging winds though. And this risk could actually stretch all the way down into parts of far eastern Oklahoma, western Arkansas, and even parts of Texas before it stretches back out west. And in the west, because we have a bit of a trough kind of pushing in from the Pacific Ocean, I actually do think we could potentially see a couple of severe storms out here in the desert southwest, mostly bringing that threat for potentially some damaging wind gust as well today. And here's a better look at our troughs across the US. We can see that trough digging in near the southwest, potentially bringing some severe weather out there today. I think all of that risk is mostly just for some general thunderstorms as of now. I do think we could see that risk elevated And then, of course, that big trough and big low pressure system across the central and southern plains, bringing a lot of our severe weather over there, and then even down into parts of Texas and Arkansas. And then that's pretty much it for things causing weather. But lastly, here is the environment in front of those things that are causing all of our weather, specifically in the central plains. This was taken from far eastern Kansas, but we'd expect to see an environment somewhat similar to this. All of the main difference would be in CAPE values as we go to different places along our line. But in this specific area, it's looking very favorable for severe weather, in my opinion. We have a very unstable atmosphere, 4,000 CAPE, a very moist atmosphere, 70 dew point, and actually some very nice shear, at least, to potentially support a spin up tornado risk with a couple of our storms, or at least a weak tornado risk. Another thing fueling this, it's going to be a pretty high 3 CAPE nearing 200. That's very high. And couple that with the wind veering and lower cloud base, I definitely think the chance of tornadoes is non-zero. It's just mostly going to depend on that messy storm mode, and if we can see a couple of more organized clusters. Now, for storm organization, our bulk shear isn't super high, so that could be an issue. So it mostly looks like we're just going to see some damaging gust and then some small hail. For that small hail threat, it's mostly going to be hindered by that messy and more linear storm mode, but we do have a pretty low freezing level, some nice mid-level lapse rates, quite a bit of CAPE up near freezing level, so potentially some 1 to 1.5 inch in diameter hail today. Then we have some dry air aloft, and then a pretty high precipitable water. So just general things for a damaging wind threat. But to recap, on top of that damaging wind threat, I think small hail and potentially a non-zero tornado threat is going to be in play in our marginal risk of severe weather today.